Port Charles has seen its fair share of darkness, betrayal, and redemption arcs. But nothing could have prepared the town, or the viewers, for the explosive twist that's about to shatter the Corinthos and Morgan families forever. In a shocking turn of events, Vaughn, the troubled and mysterious young man recently revealed to be Carly and Jason's secret son, will cross a line no one thought possible. He murders his biological father. But here's the tragic twist. The father Vaughn ends up killing isn't the man he's hated his whole life. It's Jason Morgan himself. This is a sprawling, twisted saga of secrets buried for decades, guilt and redemption, and a young man pushed to the edge by the truth of his own existence. Let's break it all down and explore how Vaughn's rage will destroy Jason, shake Carly to her very core, and drag half of Port Charles into a dark reckoning. When Vaughn first stepped into Port Charles, few could have predicted the storm he would bring. Darkly handsome, brooding, and carrying scars both visible and hidden, Vaughn immediately caught the eye of many and set off alarms for those who could sense trouble. Unknown to most, Vaughn's existence itself was the result of a fateful night between Jason Morgan and Carly Corinthos decades ago. A night they kept hidden from the world, fearing what Sonny, and even Jason's own family, might do if the truth came out. Raised away from Port Charles, Vaughn grew up under the care of a violent man he believed to be his father, a criminal with ties to various syndicates who twisted the boy into believing Jason was the real villain. By the time Vaughn discovered his true paternity, his hatred for Jason had already been nurtured, curated, and sharpened into a weapon. Fueled by this dark upbringing and the twisted loyalty he felt toward the man who raised him, Vaughn arrived in Port Charles with a single mission: kill Jason Morgan and make him pay for the pain Vaughn endured growing up. In the shadows, Vaughn carefully plotted his revenge. He stalked Jason, learning his patterns and weaknesses. But the more time he spent in Port Charles, the more his rage collided with confusion. Vaughn saw Jason not as a monster, but as a complicated man, one who protected those he loved, who carried guilt like armor, and who seemed to have genuinely cared for Carly once. Yet, the pull of his dark upbringing proved stronger than any new insight. The man Vaughn believed to be his father had taught him that Jason destroyed his life, and that loyalty to family, no matter how broken, demanded blood. Vaughn's plot took a shocking turn when Carly, finally realizing who Vaughn really was, confronted him. In an emotional showdown at the Corinthos kitchen, a room filled with ghosts of past secrets, Carly admitted everything. Vaughn was Jason's biological son. Carly had kept his existence hidden to protect both Jason and Vaughn from Sonny, whose wrath would have destroyed them all. The man Vaughn believed was his father was, in fact, a brutal enforcer once hired by Cyrus Renault, a man who had no real blood tie to Vaughn. For Vaughn, the revelation shattered the foundation of his entire life. Everything he'd been taught was a lie. The man he loved and feared had manipulated him into hating the one man who was actually his father. Carly's confession left Vaughn teetering between devastation and fury. His entire identity was built around a lie, but he couldn't let go of the hate he'd carried for so long. Vaughn confronted Jason, screaming accusations and demanding answers. Jason, for his part, tried to explain that he hadn't known about Vaughn until recently, that he'd wanted to come clean, but Carly had convinced him it was too dangerous, that he regretted every day he'd missed with his son. Vaughn didn't know whether to punch Jason or hug him. But the poison planted by the man who raised him wouldn't fade overnight. In a final, desperate act to finish what he started, Vaughn pulled a gun on Jason. In the depths of night at the pier, a place haunted by decades of Port Charles's darkest secrets, Vaughn confronted Jason. He demanded Jason confess to crimes he didn't commit, still clinging to the lies of his childhood. Jason, heartbroken, refused to fight his son. "If this is what you need," Jason whispered, stepping closer. Vaughn's hand trembled, tears streaming down his face. But the years of manipulation won. He pulled the trigger. Jason collapsed, mortally wounded. Vaughn dropped the gun, realizing too late the horror of what he'd done. Jason reached out with his final breath, whispering, "I love you, my son." By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. Jason Morgan, hitman, protector, brother, and father, was gone. News of Jason's death ripped through Port Charles like wildfire. Sonny, who'd always seen Jason as a brother, blamed himself for pushing Jason away in recent years. Carly was inconsolable, crushed by the loss of the man who'd been her soulmate in everything but name, and haunted by guilt that hiding Vaughn had set this tragedy in motion. Sam, Danny, Jake, and Scout faced an unimaginable reality. Jason was truly gone this time, not just missing or presumed dead. The Corinthos kids, too, felt the loss of the man who'd protected them through countless storms. But the most tragic figure was Vaughn himself, a young man who had sought vengeance, only to discover too late that the real villain wasn't the man he killed, but the man who raised him. In a cruel twist, Jason's past caught up to him, even after his death. The PCPD, led by Dante Falconeri, opened old cases linking Jason to multiple unsolved crimes. Though many charges could never be proven, Jason's name was dragged through the mud in the press. District Attorney Robert Scorpio, torn between justice and loyalty to an old friend, allowed the cases to proceed, citing the need for transparency. Jason's children were forced to grapple not only with his death, but also the shadow of his criminal legacy. Carly, ever the fighter, tried to defend Jason's memory, but the truth of his life as Sonny's enforcer could not be buried. Even as the town mourned him, whispers of Jason's crimes filled the air. Vaughn, racked with guilt, didn't flee. Instead, he turned himself into Dante, confessing everything. At his arraignment, he refused to post bail, telling the judge, "I killed my father. I don't deserve freedom." The courts prepared to try him for second-degree murder. But the emotional complexity of the case, Vaughn being Jason's son, manipulated since childhood, made it clear the trial would be as much about the sins of Port Charles's past as Vaughn's crime. The tragedy splintered Port Charles into bitter camps. Carly refused to condemn Vaughn, insisting he was as much a victim as Jason. Sam demanded Vaughn face justice, believing Jason's children deserved accountability. Sonny, torn between grief and rage, saw in Vaughn both a tragic figure and a threat to his family's legacy. Dante struggled to separate his duty as a cop from his loyalty to the family that had always been his own. The courtroom promised to become a battlefield of tears, betrayals, and long-buried secrets. Jason's funeral was the largest Port Charles had seen in years. Friends and enemies alike came to pay respects. Sonny stood stoic, his grief masked by years of practiced control. Carly, wearing black, couldn't hide her devastation. Sam, Danny, Jake, and Scout wept openly, mourning not only a father, but the lost chance to know him better. Vaughn, in handcuffs, was granted a brief moment to say goodbye. As Jason's casket was lowered into the ground, Vaughn whispered through tears, "I'm sorry, Dad." The words came too late, but they were real. Jason's death forced Port Charles to confront the legacy of violence and secrets that had ruled its underworld for decades. Sonny questioned whether his empire had poisoned every life it touched. Carly grappled with the realization that hiding Vaughn had cost her everything. Vaughn faced trial, with the possibility of spending decades in prison. Even those on the fringes, Michael, Jocelyn, Trina, and Dex, felt the shockwaves, realizing the cost of living in a town built on blood and secrets. As Vaughn's trial began, his defense attorney built a case around his tragic upbringing. Manipulated by a violent man, denied the truth of his birth, and consumed by lies from childhood. Prosecutors argued that no amount of pain justified murder. The jury had to decide, was Vaughn a killer shaped by hate, or a son destroyed by secrets he never asked for? In a stunning moment, Carly took the stand, admitting her role in hiding Vaughn and begging the court for mercy. Her raw testimony shook the courtroom, leaving many in tears. Ultimately, Vaughn was convicted of manslaughter, not murder, with the court acknowledging the psychological manipulation he'd endured. He was sentenced to 15 years, eligible for parole after 8. The decision split Port Charles. Some believed justice had been served. Others felt Vaughn's sentence was too light. A few, including Carly, saw it as the only way to let Vaughn someday build a life beyond the shadows of Jason's death. Even as months passed, the scars remained. Carly visited Vaughn in prison, trying to build the relationship she denied them both. Vaughn, haunted by guilt, struggled to forgive himself. Jason's children wrestled with anger, grief, and the complicated truth of who their father had been. Sonny vowed to protect what remained of Jason's family, but the weight of what happened would never truly lift. In the end, Jason's story became what it always was, a tragedy of a man who tried to protect those he loved, but whose life was built on violence. Vaughn, born of love and secrets, had become the instrument of Jason's downfall, and now had to live with that truth. Port Charles, too, learned a lesson it would never forget. Secrets always demand a price. And sometimes, the cost is paid in blood. Vaughn kills his biological father. Jason pays for past crimes isn't just a plot twist. It's a seismic shift that redefines what General Hospital is willing to explore. The true price of loyalty, the weight of guilt, and the haunting reality that sometimes, even love can destroy. The road ahead promises even more heartbreak, redemption, and shocking revelations. But for now, Port Charles must mourn the man they lost, reckon with the son he leaves behind, and face the truth. No secret stays buried forever. Stay tuned, GH fans. The darkest chapter yet has just begun.